Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She looked at me across the dinner table and said it with a smirk. Guys line up for me daily. She said it like it was supposed to hurt, like I'd flinch or argue or beg. Instead, I just said, then let them pay to stand there. I watched her face freeze for the first time in a long time. No comeback. No laugh. Just that silence that comes when the game ends and the scoreboard isn't in your favor. We were sitting at Olive Garden, her favorite place to turn small moments into scenes. She'd ordered wine she didn't finish, scrolled her phone between bites, checking notifications like they were oxygen. Every time she laughed at something on her screen, I knew it wasn't a joke. It was bait. She loved pretending other men were waiting, watching, wanting her. And for a long time, I let her believe it gave her power. But that night was different. Something inside me had shifted. It wasn't anger. It was a clean, cold kind of understanding. She wasn't trying to connect. She was trying to compete. And I was done being a contestant in her performance. She didn't speak the rest of dinner. I paid the bill, walked her to the car, and she said she needed space. I told her she already had it. That night, she didn't come home. I didn't ask where she went. I turned off my phone, made coffee from the old Starbucks blend we'd bought weeks ago, and sat in silence. It was strange how light the house felt without her voice echoing through it. The next morning, I woke up to a dozen missed calls. Her name flashing over and over. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, just clarity. The woman who claimed men lined up for her couldn't stand not being first in line herself. By the second day, her texts changed tone. From smug to unsure. From teasing to pleading. Can we talk? I didn't mean it like that. Why are you ignoring me? I didn't reply. The silence was doing the talking for me now. Funny thing, she always thought she had options. She thought attention equaled value. But now, as her phone stayed silent and mine stayed off, she was finally learning the truth. Attention fades. Respect doesn't. And the moment I stopped chasing her noise, she started drowning in her own. By the third day, she started to panic. The woman who once bragged about men lining up for her couldn't handle being ignored by one. She sent a message saying she missed me, that she just needed to feel wanted. I didn't reply. She wanted an audience, not accountability. And for once, the stage was empty. It's strange how silence can flip everything. A week ago, she controlled the rhythm, every word, every reaction, every pause. But now, the silence wasn't hers. It was mine, and it wasn't a punishment. It was a mirror. I spent those first few days quietly rebuilding myself. I'd wake up early, grab a coffee from Starbucks, and sit in my truck watching the city wake up. No texts to check. No guessing games to play. Just peace. For the first time in years, my head wasn't full of her noise. A friend called, asked if we were okay. I just said, we're figuring it out. He laughed, said he saw her out the other night at a bar, alone, checking her phone every few minutes, trying to look like she wasn't waiting for someone. I said nothing, but I could picture it perfectly. The same woman who once treated attention like currency, now sitting there broke. That night, she showed up at my place. Her tone was different. No arrogance, no fire, just confusion. She said she didn't understand why I was acting like this, that she'd just been joking, that I was too sensitive. I told her calm doesn't equal weakness. She said she missed how I used to chase her. I said, you can't miss something you killed. That hit harder than I expected. She stood there for a moment, eyes watering, and whispered, so this is it? I told her it had been it for a while. She just hadn't noticed. She left quietly, her perfume lingering like memory, sweet but suffocating. When the door closed, I sat back and felt the weight lift completely. The next morning, her number popped up again. I didn't open it. I just watched as the notifications faded. It's funny. She thought her beauty made her powerful. But power isn't about how many people want you. It's about how easily you can walk away when someone doesn't value you. And now, as she stared at a silent phone, she was finally learning what real power sounds like. It's quiet. It's steady. It's gone. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No texts. No calls. Just silence thick enough to notice. For years, she'd been the soundtrack to my life. Constant noise, constant drama, constant need for validation disguised as confidence. Now, all that energy had collapsed into stillness. I went about my routine like nothing had happened. Work, gym, coffee. On the fifth morning, I drove to Walmart for groceries, headphones in, no rush. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. No one waiting to criticize. No one analyzing every word. Just peace. But peace never stays unnoticed by the person who used to disturb it. That night, I saw her car outside my building. She didn't knock. Just sat there, headlights off, parked across the street. I watched from the window for a few minutes. Her phone screen lit up every few seconds. She was scrolling, waiting, hoping maybe I'd text. But I didn't. Eventually, she drove off. It's strange how predictable people become once you stop reacting. She'd always needed to feel chased, to prove to herself that she was wanted. But what she never realized was that love isn't proven through pursuit. It's proven through peace. 2 days later, a mutual friend called. Said she'd been out with her friends, pretending everything was fine, laughing too loud, posting photos like she'd moved on. But everyone could see through it. He said she barely touched her drink, kept checking her phone, waiting for a message that wasn't coming. I didn't say much, just that I hoped she was okay. And I meant it. Because the truth was, I didn't hate her. I just couldn't carry her chaos anymore. That weekend, I drove out to the lake. It was quiet, cold, and still. I sat on the tailgate of my car, drinking coffee, watching the sunrise. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, clarity. I wasn't angry, or broken, or waiting for her to understand. I was done explaining my worth to someone who only saw it when it was leaving. That night, she texted again. Just one line. I didn't think you'd actually stop caring. I looked at the screen for a moment and then turned it face down. Because she still didn't get it. I hadn't stopped caring. I just started caring for myself instead. A week passed before I heard from her again. It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed. The message was long, emotional, almost theatrical. She said she was sorry, that she didn't mean what she said that night, that she just wanted to feel something again. She wrote about how the house felt empty without me, how she couldn't stand the quiet. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, she made sure silence was impossible. Now it was her only company. I didn't reply. I wasn't cruel. I just knew that answering would start the same loop all over again. Guilt, apology, promises, control. It always came in that order. I wasn't playing that game anymore. The next day, she showed up at my work. She looked different. Not in the obvious way. Same hair, same perfume, but something had shifted in her eyes. It wasn't arrogance this time. It was uncertainty. She said she missed me, said she was trying. I told her calmly that trying after the damage isn't the same as caring before it. She didn't respond. Just stood there, staring, like she was realizing something too late. That evening, I stopped at Starbucks on my way home. Sat by the window with my coffee, watching people walk by. For once, I didn't feel the pull to fix anything, to explain myself, or to be understood. The quiet between us wasn't revenge, it was release. Later that night, I saw her post something on social media. A photo of wine, a quote about strong women letting go. It made me smile, not out of mockery, but recognition. She was still trying to rewrite the story, still performing strength instead of facing the emptiness underneath. Days turned into weeks. Her messages slowed, then stopped completely. The last one she ever sent said, "You'll miss me when I'm gone." I didn't even open it. Because the truth was, I already missed the version of her that never really existed, the one I wanted to believe in. Now, every time I drive past that Olive Garden, I think about that night. Her voice, her smirk, her need to prove she could be wanted. And I realized something simple but sharp. She wasn't testing my patience that night. She was measuring her own worth. And the silence that followed gave her the answer she didn't want to hear. It's strange how quiet endings never feel real at first. You expect some grand final scene, some closure that ties everything neatly together. But real endings are silent. They slip in like shadows, and by the time you notice, they've already settled in for good. That's what it felt like with her, an ending that didn't need words. Weeks went by, and I barely thought about her. I wasn't avoiding her. I just didn't carry her anymore. I started working longer hours, spent weekends fishing at the lake, grabbed coffee from Starbucks every morning like clockwork. Life wasn't exciting, but it was steady, and steady had become my favorite feeling. Then one evening, I ran into one of her friends, Melissa, at Walmart. She looked surprised to see me. Said my wife had been keeping to herself lately. Said she'd stop going out, stop posting, stop pretending. She's not doing well, Melissa added, like it was supposed to make me react. I didn't. I just nodded, thanked her, and kept walking. On the drive home, I thought about that. How she used to crave attention the way most people crave air. She fed on validation, on being wanted. But when the attention faded, she was left with nothing but herself. And that was always her biggest fear. A few days later, a message came through from an unknown number. It was her. She said she didn't want to argue, didn't want to rewrite history. She just wanted to meet and talk like adults. I stared at the message for a while before replying with one word. When? We met at the same Olive Garden where it all began. She looked different, calmer, softer. The usual spark of arrogance in her eyes was gone. She said she'd been thinking a lot, that she'd realized she was always performing, trying to prove she was desirable because deep down, she didn't feel worthy. She said she envied my silence. I told her silence isn't strength. It's what's left when the noise finally stops mattering. She nodded, eyes glistening. Then she asked if I hated her. I said no. I just stopped trying to understand her. That was the truth. We finished our meal in near silence. She paid the bill this time. Before leaving, she said, "You were always the calm I mistook for weakness." I watched her walk away, her reflection fading in the window's glare. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I lost her. I felt like I finally found myself. After that dinner, something inside me shifted completely. I didn't feel anger, regret, or nostalgia, just a calm understanding that some people only learn through loss. She had built her identity around being desired, and when the desire stopped feeding her, she was forced to face the silence she'd created. I didn't hate her for it. I just finally saw her clearly. A week later, she texted me again. This time, it wasn't emotional. Just a short message. "I'm starting therapy. You were right about me." I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't believe her, but because for the first time, she wasn't trying to get a reaction. She was trying to rebuild. I didn't reply. Some conversations don't need an audience. Life went on. My routines stayed simple. Gym in the mornings, coffee at Starbucks, work until late. I'd become addicted to peace. That's what real healing feels like. Not excitement, not distraction, just quiet stability. Every now and then, I'd remember how chaotic things used to be. The constant tension, the emotional games, the way she'd measure love by how much I'd chase. And I'd smile, because that man was gone. One Saturday, while grabbing a few things from Walmart, I saw her again. She was in one of the aisles, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie, no makeup, no performance. She didn't see me at first. She was just standing there, staring blankly at a shelf of candles, lost in thought. When she finally noticed me, she smiled, small, tired, but real. She walked over slowly. She said she didn't want to interrupt, just wanted to say she was doing better, that she'd stopped measuring her worth by how much attention she got, that she'd started focusing on being present instead of being admired. I told her I was glad. I meant it. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her, but she hoped I was happy. I told her I was. We stood there in silence for a moment. Not awkward silence, peaceful. She nodded, said goodbye, and walked away. I watched her go, realizing that maybe for the first time, she wasn't pretending. That night, I sat on my porch, the air cool and still, and thought about how far things had come. She'd found the stillness she once mocked. I'd found the strength I didn't know I had. In the end, neither of us won. We just finally stopped losing ourselves. It's strange how people can evolve without words. After that last meeting at Walmart, she didn't text, didn't call, didn't appear. The silence between us became mutual, not cold but respectful. Like two people who finally understood that distance doesn't always mean hostility. It can mean peace. Weeks turned into months, and life found its rhythm again. My mornings still started with Starbucks coffee and long drives before work. I'd listen to old playlists, songs that used to remind me of her, but they didn't sting anymore. They just existed, like background noise to a story I'd already finished reading. Every now and then, I'd think about the version of her that once existed, the confident, magnetic woman who could command a room. But when I really thought about it, I realized that wasn't confidence at all. It was fear disguised as charm. She had been terrified of not being enough, so she surrounded herself with validation. Compliments, attention, admiration, it was her armor. But underneath, she was just scared. One afternoon, I was at a small diner off the highway, the same place we used to stop on road trips. I sat in the corner booth, reading on my phone, when I saw her walk in. Alone. She ordered coffee, sat 2 tables away, and didn't notice me right away. There was no show this time. No makeup, no laughter meant to be overheard. Just her, quietly stirring her coffee. When she finally looked up and saw me, her expression was calm. She gave a small nod. I nodded back. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. There was an understanding there, unspoken but real. As I finished my meal and got up to leave, she looked at me once more and smiled. Not the kind of smile meant to lure or provoke, but one of acknowledgement. Like she was saying, I get it now. Outside, the evening air was warm, heavy with the sound of crickets. I got into my car, turned the key, and sat there for a moment before driving off. I realized that was the final chapter. Not because we said goodbye, but because we didn't have to. She'd finally stopped performing, and I'd finally stopped rescuing. That's when I understood something simple and permanent. Sometimes closure doesn't come from conversation. It comes from both people finally becoming quiet at the same time. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. By then, it had been nearly a year since that night at Olive Garden. The fight, the words, the silence, they'd all settled into something distant, almost unreal. What once felt like a storm now felt like weather I'd survived. You don't resent the rain after it's gone. You just remember how it felt when you finally stepped out of it. One afternoon, while I was driving back from work, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an old photo memory. Us at a fair, smiling, pretending everything was fine. For a second, I almost didn't recognize the man in the picture. He looked tired in ways I couldn't see back then. I closed it and kept driving. There was no pain in it anymore, just perspective. Later that week, I ran into one of her old co-workers at Starbucks. She mentioned that my ex had moved to another city, started working remotely, kept to herself mostly. She said she'd changed a lot, more grounded, quieter. I nodded, not out of curiosity, but acknowledgement. Everyone changes eventually. The question is whether they do it to heal or to hide. I hoped she'd chosen the first. That evening, I drove out to the lake, the same one where I used to sit during the hardest days. The air was cooler now, fall creeping in. I watched the water move, small ripples breaking the surface. It reminded me of her laughter, back before it became a weapon. I thought about how different things might have been if either of us had learned to listen before we tried to speak. As the sun set, I got a message from an unknown number. Just one line. Thank you for not coming back. I knew immediately who it was. I didn't respond. There was no need to. It wasn't bitterness, it was release. I sat there until the last bit of light disappeared, feeling something that used to scare me, complete stillness. She once told me men lined up for her, that she'd never be alone. Maybe she was right, but none of them would ever stand still the way I did. None would love her in silence long enough for her to finally hear herself. And maybe that's what she'd finally learned. That validation fades. But the echo of what you destroy when you play with someone's peace, that never really goes away. Months passed quietly, and life had finally turned into something steady. I wasn't checking my phone for her name anymore, not wondering where she was, not revisiting old memories. It's strange how peace feels awkward at first, like silence after years of noise. But after a while, it becomes the only sound you want to hear. One evening, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo, her sitting by the water somewhere, a small smile on her face. No caption, no context, just that image. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. I looked at it for a while, realizing how different she looked. Not flawless, not performative, real. She seemed like a woman who'd finally stopped running from herself. The next day, while getting gas, I ran into one of her old friends. She said my ex had been keeping to herself, living simply, off social media completely. Apparently, she'd told people she was done pretending. Those words stayed with me. Done pretending. I knew how hard that sentence was for someone like her to live. That night, I sat on my porch, a cup of Starbucks coffee in hand, thinking about how the story had flipped completely. The woman who once needed attention to survive had vanished from the spotlight. And me, the man she called quiet, boring, predictable, had become everything she wasn't ready for. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pride. It was balance. Sometimes, people have to fall in love with their own silence before they understand what they ruined. I didn't take pleasure in knowing she missed me. I took peace in knowing I'd learned what she couldn't teach me: how to stay calm in a world that thrives on noise. As I watched the night settle over the neighborhood, I finally understood something. She never wanted to lose me. She just never believed she could. Her confidence wasn't strength, it was blindness. And now that she'd seen what real distance looked like, she was learning the cost of what she took for granted. The next morning, I deleted her photo. Not out of anger, but because it had served its purpose. It reminded me that closure doesn't come from people changing. It comes from you no longer needing them to. She once said guys lined up for her daily. Maybe they still do. But now, she's the one waiting in line. For peace she can't buy, and silence she once laughed at. It's been a year and a half since that night. The kind of time that doesn't just pass, it transforms you. Looking back, I realize how much of my life used to revolve around reaction. Her moods, her words, her validation. I lived in her orbit, not realizing I was shrinking a little more each day just to keep her world stable. Now, my world is quiet, simple, steady, and it finally feels like mine. I don't know exactly when the shift happened. Maybe it was the day I stopped waiting for her to apologize. Or maybe it was the first morning I woke up and didn't think about what she was doing. Healing doesn't come with a single moment. It sneaks up on you in the middle of a calm morning, when you realize the silence doesn't hurt anymore. It feels earned. Last week, I got an email from her. The subject line just said, "Thank you." I opened it, expecting another apology, another attempt at closure. But it wasn't that. She wrote that she'd finally found peace, that she understood why I had to leave the way I did. She said she didn't blame me anymore, that she'd met someone new, but that the version of her I knew would never return. At the end, she wrote one line that stayed with me. "You taught me that silence isn't punishment, it's reflection." I sat there for a while, reading that sentence over and over. There was no pain in it, no resentment, just honesty, the kind that only comes after everything else burns away. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because in that single message, I knew she finally understood everything words could never teach her. That night, I took a drive out to the lake again. Same place, same stillness. I parked my car near the edge, turned off the engine, and just listened. The world was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything I'd rebuilt after she was gone. People talk about revenge like it's fire, like it's loud. But the truth is, the greatest revenge is silence. The kind that heals you so completely that even their memory can't disturb it. She once said men lined up for her daily. Maybe they still do. But none of them will ever understand that the only man who ever truly saw her walked away without saying a word. And that silence became the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Been through it. When they crossed a line, and you made sure they felt it.